Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going international. We're going to be speaking to an author who isn't here. He's in London. His name is Albert Jack, and he has written a very informative and enthralling book with lots of laugh and more information than you can shake a stick at. The title of his book is What Caesar Did for My Salad. Subtitle, The Curious Stories Behind Our Favorite Foods. And it is a parody book published by our friends at the Penguin Group. Thank you for coming on board, Albert.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
One of the interesting things about this book is that it's quite efficient in many respects. For example, when one picks up a book, one might have an immediate question. Well, why has this book been written?
Okay.
And you do that right away in the first sentence of the introduction. You let us know food is just as entitled to a proper history as castles, wars, kings, queens, art, literature, or the bubonic plague.
I thought that set the tone nicely, didn't you? I like that intro as well, I must admit.
That's a wonderful opening. I mean, I think food, is right up there with the bubonic plague.
Oh, without a doubt. In terms of history, in terms of what we can learn from it, it's streets ahead.
Now, the other thing is that you approach this this history in an easy, understandable way. You don't get teachy on us. You just let us know what you found out, and particularly you let us know about things that made you laugh.
Well, I've never been accused of being teachy, that's for sure. And in terms of history, I mean, it's what I do. It's historic origins. As a historian, I've always found that there's a nicer way of finding out about history and also teaching it for other people, or even for people's entertainment. For example, with food, the history of food has been done to death. I mean, you can go back to the Egyptians with their kebabs, or the Romans and what they invented, and of course Marco Polo and the spice routes that changed our food habits forever, and the Italians and the French, and blah, 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 blah. Wouldn't it be much nicer to find out who Margarita was and why the world's most famous pizza is named after her? Or perhaps who Dame Nellie Melba was, and the opera singer who had the sore throat and laryngitis, who had the peach Melba ice cream invented for her, which is, of course, these are worldwide dishes that we all enjoy, but who were these people that inspired them?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what the book does, time and time again. And it's enthralling.
Thank you.
Now, the arrangement of the book makes a lot of sense to me. It's kind of arranged by the meals of the day, starting with breakfast and lunchbox fast food, aperitifs and appetizers, which I was pleased to find that martini was in there.
Yeah, well, they can't all be there, obviously, because it would have been what you don't want to do with a book like this, is to end up with a 1,000-page sort of dictionary. That wasn't the point at all. It was to make it fun and make it interesting, and also to move away from the actual dishes, if you like, and to explain perhaps some of the expressions that we use, like humble pie and just desserts, that are food-related.
Right.
And so, it was to get into all of those kind of things. The whole idea of the book is for somebody like yourself or myself to look at it and say, hey, I didn't know that. Hey, listen to this. Guess what? Guess where cappuccino comes from? It doesn't come from a cappuccino bean at all. It comes from the Capuchin monks, a French and Italian order in the 14th century. And that kind of thing interested me and appears to be interesting others as well.
And they're a subset of the Franciscans. Don't forget that.
Oh, no.
The Franciscans will get upset.
They certainly will. There's plenty of them still, I believe.
Nothing worse than a mad Franciscan in the radio studio. I'll tell you that right now.
Mad monks. We've all had them, haven't we?
One of the sections that really intrigued me is titled The Surreal History of Breakfast Cereal.
Yeah, Surreal and Cereal. I actually didn't come up with that title. That was a book editor somewhere. But it's quite clever, isn't it?
You make it very clear that what we do at breakfast these days, eat cereal, is a big step down from the excitement of the breakfast meal in years gone by, when, it had everything in it. It had several kinds of meat, it had eggs, and it had stews and everything you can think of.
Yeah, fish, of course, and kedgeree and chops and potatoes and all sorts of things. Well, I mean, in days gone by, of course, people worked an awful lot harder in an awful lot colder conditions than you and I have to. So, they needed pretty solid breakfast. One of the interesting stories, I wouldn't go into it in too much detail here, but the story of the full English breakfast, which of course is worldwide. You can get that in any hotel, anywhere you stay. And there's quite a nice story in there of how the Irish believe that the English stole that from them, like they seem to steal everything else from the Irish. And in fact, it was called the Irish breakfast until the English got hold of it 200 years ago. But I kind of used the potato famine to dispel that sort of myth. But there's all sorts of kind of funny little anecdotal stories attached to all kinds of meals here.
Yeah, no,
Eggs Benedict, for example. Who on earth was Benedict, and why is one of the world's most famous eggs breakfasts named after him? That's all in the book.
Everything is in this book. Everything is in this book. Well, I'll tell you what, one of the most satisfying things about what Caesar did for my salad is that it sets the record straight. Like, where do French fries really come from? Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
What Caesar did for my salad, the curious stories behind our favorite foods. The author, Albert Jack, is with us all the way from London. The book is published by Penguin. And one of the things I said going into the break is that one of the great virtues of this book is that it sets the record straight in so many cases. I mean, you got people walking around in a foodie place like San Francisco, and if you ask them who originated French fries, they would say quickly, "Oh, French, the French, of course." But according to you, that ain't so.
It isn't so, no. I mean, the French were one of the first groups of chefs, if you like, who did used to deep fry their vegetables. And in one way, it helped preserve them, of course, in the pre-refrigeration days. But it was your very own Thomas Jefferson when he was the ambassador to France during kind of around the time of the war against the British, the War of the Revolution. 1780 or something like that, 1790. He picked up many French ways, if you like, and even brought a French chef back with him. And when he became president, I think turn of the century, it was around, must have been 1800 something or other, he brought his French chef with him, who incidentally was a guy called Julien. Therefore, there's the origin of why thinly sliced vegetables are called the Julien.
Yeah.
Indeed. Jefferson's chef. And he brought them back, and when the first meal or the meals that he used to serve at the White House as president, he used to describe his vegetables, potatoes fried in the French manner, and other vegetables too. So the French fry is very, very, very American, in fact, right from the White House. Indeed.
Another very common food that whose story you tell is the hot dog. Now, as I recall it from my reading of the book, it was a cold day, and the Yankees were playing the Giants, a game of what we call baseball.
Indeed.
Yes. And the concessionaire, Harry Stevens, bought up all the Dachshund sausages he could find.
Dachshund, yeah.
Yeah, Dachshund. And vendors were crying out, "They're red hot. Get your Dachshund sausages while they're red hot."
Indeed.
And somebody a cartoonist by the name of T.A. Dorgan sketched the scene, and he was unable to spell Dachshund. I couldn't either. And he used the word hot dog instead. Now that's where hot dog came from.
It was a cartoonist who brought that up, and of course hot dogs are very closely associated with baseball, aren't they? They're available in every baseball stadium and always have been. They came across with the Germans, the great German immigration during the 1800s, 1850 to 1880 or something like this. And it was the American Hamburg line that was bringing immigrants from Hamburg in Germany into America by the shipload, by the millions, in fact. I think Germany, another fact I found out, Germany is responsible for one of the highest ethnic groups in America now, far more so than the Irish and the Italians, which did surprise me. There's far more people who claim German descendancy. But anyway, their foods came with them and were cooked on the ships and on the docks, and of course the hamburger came across on the hamburger line, which was the flat meat patty, and the Frankfurter, the hot dog, as it turned out to be, came across. They were German influences, which became American cuisine, really, or staple cuisine, didn't they?
Yeah, they really did. Yeah, we eat them all the time, I guess.
One of the stories that I also touch in that particular part, if I remember rightly, is bangers. I don't know if in America you have.
Yeah. Well, you can talk about them now. I was going to save them for later, but there is a section in the back where you bring up the dish bangers and mash.
Well, we use that quite often here in the good old UK. We call our sausages bangers, and it occurred to me, I didn't know why, but I remember the story my old granddad, who was a First World War trench soldier, told me he died, I think, in 1980 or something, so many, many years ago. He told me as a small boy of how the sausages they were given on rations that used to cook up on shovels over open fires would actually explode because of rationing. They'd been filled with oatmeal and water and very little pork and sausage meat, and of course the skins on them would explode, and they would feel like they were under attack many times. They would dive for cover because their breakfast was exploding, and they became known as bangers thanks to that particular time, and still are. That's
a very smart idea to call them bangers under those circumstances.
Indeed, yeah.
You Brits are pretty smart.
Well,
pretty
I'm
smart.
About that. I think we're still a little way behind in our cuisine, but certainly behind the French and the Italians. But we do have some pretty interesting stories of their origins, hey?
You know, if you're going to have a fairly serious meal, it might well start with soup.
Indeed.
And one of the most popular soups to this day is French onion soup, and that didn't start in France either.
No, that's a Persian. That dates back to, that's thousands of years old. The French onion soup, I believe, started or became a part of culture through the pledge soup. It was a religious soup that used to be served at not only just weddings, but if anyone was on embarking on a great trip of the era, of the then-known world, which wasn't very big as we know it today, was it? They hadn't even discovered Great Britain, let alone America in those days. But anyone embarking on a big trip would be fed pledge soup, which was an onion soup and croutons. And
the eating of that dish kind of segued, if you will, into a kind of prayer service, prayer for the recovery of the sick child, or his or her safe return from the journey.
There are quite a few traditional, certainly religious, but traditional aspects to food. I mean, fish and chips over here in England, again, I don't know if it's quite as prevalent in America, but fish and chips on a Friday is a tradition here, for sure, and that's an old Catholic tradition of not eating meat over the weekend. Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays, they weren't allowed to eat meat in days gone by, so could only eat fish, and which is how fish and chips becomes a Friday delicacy.
Now, another thing that you talk about, and it's right in the title, is what Caesar did for my salad.
Yeah.
What did Caesar do?
Well, this, of course, had nothing to do with Julius Caesar, as we might have thought. This is Caesar Cardini, who was a Los Angeles restaurateur, or in fact Hollywood, back in the days of the Prohibition, 1920 to 1930-something. And he was a clever guy. He worked out that if he moved his entire restaurant a couple of hours south, across the border, in fact, he had a restaurant in San Diego as well, so right on the border, just a few miles south into a town called Tijuana, his restaurant wouldn't be governed by the American Prohibition laws. In other words,
hold on.
Alcohol.
Hold on. When people talk about prohibition, we have to take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
What Caesar Did for My Salad. The curious stories behind our favorite foods by Albert Jack. That's what we're talking about today. And we have some traditions on this program. And one of them is if we cut an author off because of going to the break, we let them finish their story when we come back. We've come back. Finish your Caesar salad story, please.
What a good tradition. Well, yeah, we were talking about how Caesar Cardini had moved his restaurant rather inspiringly across the border into Tijuana in Mexico, where he was not governed by the prohibition laws. And his clientele, if you like, which was the Hollywood jet set, as they became known, as they started flying around in the 30s, Errol Flynn was one, Mickey Rooney was the other, would continue their partying, would finish filming on a Friday afternoon, and all fly or drive down to Tijuana and stay at Caesar's Hotel and carry on their party, and they weren't governed there by the prohibition laws. And it was on one of those occasions, the July the 4th celebration, that Cardini's daughter claimed in a book she wrote years and years ago that he had run out of ingredients and just threw together a salad on the Sunday before his clients were all flying back to work, I guess, with whatever was left, which is why you have so many unusual ingredients, chicken and anchovies and egg and all croutons and all sorts of odds and ends are thrown into a Caesar salad that seem to have worked for him. And the Hollywood actors used to demand it on set and in hotels all over the world. In fact, it's probably the world's most famous salad, the Caesar salad.
I have a feeling that if people read this book, or even if they get close to it, they're going to want to know more about this stuff. Is there a website they can go to?
Oh, yeah, there's extracts from the book on albertjack.com. People can buy signed copies there, or obviously on Amazon. But there's reviews, but on the website we've got extracts of about 10 or 15 of all of the books. This is my, I think, 8th book now, and probably one of my favourites too, if I'm honest.
And the site is albertjack.com?
Albertjack.com, yeah.
Okay.
Two boys' names, albertjack.com.
Okay. Now, one of the, speaking of names, one of the things that comes up in the book is famous names. And one of the stories that absolutely blew me away was the one about Diamond Jim Brady.
Well, that's a great story, largely because he was such a great character, wasn't he? I mean,
wow, yeah.
Had you heard of him before?
I thought of him as having something to do with boxing.
Boxing, no,
pugilistic stuff.
He was the railroad man, wasn't he? Diamond Jim?
You got me. I don't know. That's
well,
what
Jim Brady was a railwayman who made a fortune with the rail networks as they grew across America in the 1800s and became friends with a number of restaurateurs. I won't give too much away about that story, actually, because, as you say, it's a fascinating story, but it involves... He ate so much and spent so much money at these restaurants that when he demanded a certain dish which became known as Soul Marguerite a la Jim Diamond, or a la Diamond Jim, I should say, one of the restaurant owners actually drew his son out of university, sent him to France to surreptitiously learn, to spy on the chefs and learn the recipe, because obviously you couldn't walk into a restaurant and ask for it, and learn the recipe. And as soon as he'd learnt it or worked his way up to become a senior enough chef to be given the recipe, immediately quit, got back on the boat back to America, and the rest, as I say, is history. There's a fascinating story there of intrigue and spying.
Now, one of the other things about Diamond Jim, which became famous, was the amount of food he could eat in a single day.
Unbelievable.
And I think that's best summed up without going into what it was. You buy the book and find the list. Is that Charles Rector, a restaurateur, said of him that the best 25, Jim Brady is the best 25 customers I have ever had.
What a wonderful quote! And I'm going from memory, but I seem to remember from when I wrote that particular, his daily intake took up about a page in the book, didn't it? It was quite a lot.
Just about, yeah. Because he ate 3 meals a day, and that was just getting started.
Yeah, 3 meals before breakfast. Yeah. And how many oysters?
Oyster Rockefeller.
Yeah. Oyster Rockefeller. And why do we call them Oyster Rockefeller? There's another story in the book for you.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very good one. And there's also a great story I like about Worcestershire sauce, Lee and Perrin. And that's a very simple story, because Lee and Perrin's business was where Worcestershire was, quote, discovered, unquote.
Well, they were scientists or chemists, in fact, or pharmacists, apothecaries in the day. And there was a particular Indian sauce, which was probably like a fish sauce that was brought back by one of the generals in the British Raj who'd served in India, and he gave this sauce to these two chemists to try and get them to find out what it was, and they failed abysmally, put the resulting mixture in a barrel in the cellar, forgot all about it, and thankfully someone had the guts or courage to go and taste it about 3 or 4 years later, after it had been, all the fish had fermented and the bones had fermented, and discovered they'd found a sauce that they could then call their own, and it was an accident, if you like, a mistake, but a very welcome one.
Well, one of the, and we're running out of time, but if you can just tell us something about pizza, because I'm going to tell them it was not actually invented or discovered in Italy, but by the Greeks and the Persians.
Well, it began as pita, which became pizza, but one particular little story there, and again, as you say, there's lots of them, was the pizza margherita. Who was Margherita?
Ah, yes.
Why was the world's most famous pizza called after her? Well, after Napoleon had finished with Italy in the 1800s and made a mess of it, it didn't actually exist in Italy. It was a series of provinces, regional warring provinces. And the first king, who was crowned in 1880, his queen, Margherita, proved to be very popular. And once on a state visit down to Naples, the home of the pizza, a pizza was invented for her in the shape and colour of the new national royal Italian flag, which was green, which became basil, white, which was the cheese, and red, which was the tomato. And if you look at the national flag of Italy, those three ingredients make up the colours. Invented the pizza in her honour, became so popular it now forms the basis of every pizza you'll ever eat.
We've got to call this off now because we're running out of time. I think you can understand why I had such a good time reading this book. I offer you the same good time. Go get your own copy. The book is called What Caesar Did for My Salad, the curious stories behind our favorite foods. The author is Albert Jack. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.